rain tapped incessantly against the window panes of the Hodgsons' modest home in Enfield. Janet, the youngest of the family, shivered as she pulled her blanket tighter around her shoulders. "Did you hear that?" she whispered to her sister Margaret, her eyes wide with fear. Margaret nodded, her face pale. "It's coming from downstairs." They crept down the stairs, each step creaking under their weight. The living room was dark, save for the flickering light of the television, casting eerie shadows across the room. The furniture seemed to have a life of its own, shifting and groaning as if something unseen was playing with it. "Who's there?" Margaret called out, her voice trembling. A low guttural laugh echoed through the room. The girls froze, their breaths hitching in their throats. "Janet, do you think it's—" Margaret couldn't finish her sentence, the fear choking her words. Janet nodded, her eyes fixed on the armchair that had just moved on its own. "It's the poltergeist." Their mother, Peggy, appeared in the doorway, her face etched with worry. "Girls, get back upstairs now." "But Mom—" "The noises," Janet started to protest. "I said now." Peggy's tone brooked no argument. Reluctantly, the girls retreated to their room, but sleep was a distant prospect. The night was filled with the sounds of furniture scraping, objects crashing, and that unsettling laugh. The next morning, Maurice Gross, a local paranormal investigator, arrived at the Hodgson home. He was a tall, thin man with a kind face, though his eyes held the weight of years of dealing with the unknown. "Good morning, Mrs. Hodgson," Maurice greeted, tipping his hat. "I've come to help." Peggy nodded, exhaustion evident in her eyes. "Thank you, Mr. Gross. We don't know what to do anymore." Maurice set up his equipment, placing tape recorders and cameras around the house. "Let's see if we can capture anything unusual," he said, trying to reassure the family. As the day wore on, the atmosphere grew heavier. Maurice reviewed his recordings, frowning as he listened to the disembodied voices and strange noises. "There's definitely something here," he murmured to himself. That evening, the family gathered in the living room, hoping for a peaceful night. But peace was not on the agenda. The temperature dropped suddenly, and a sense of dread filled the air. "Why is it so cold?" Janet asked, her breath visible in the frigid air. Maurice's eyes darted around the room. "It's a sign. Something's about to happen." The lights flickered, and then went out, plunging the room into darkness. The furniture began to move again, more violently this time. The family huddled together, fear gripping their hearts. "Show yourself," Maurice demanded, his voice steady. Despite the chaos, a shadowy figure materialized in the corner of the room, its features indistinguishable. It moved closer, the air growing colder with each step. "What do you want?" Peggy cried out, clutching her children. The figure's voice was a chilling whisper. "This is my home." Maurice stepped forward, his hand outstretched. "You need to leave these people alone. They have done nothing to you." The figure paused, its form wavering. "They disturbed my rest," it hissed. "We didn't mean to," Janet pleaded. "Please just let us be." The figure seemed to consider her words, before slowly fading away, leaving a lingering chill in the room. Maurice turned to the family. "This isn't over, but we'll find a way to make it leave for good." Peggy nodded, tears in her eyes. "Thank you, Mr. Gross." The night wore on, the sense of unease never fully dissipating. The Hodgson family knew this was just the beginning of their ordeal. The Enfield poltergeist was far from finished with them. The following day, the Hodgson household was filled with an uneasy calm. Janet and Margaret clung to their mother as Maurice reviewed his notes, his brow furrowed with concentration. "We need more evidence," Maurice muttered to himself, then louder. "Mrs. Hodgson, has anything like this happened before?" Peggy shook her head. "Not until a few weeks ago. That's when the noises started." Janet interrupted. "It began with knocking sounds. Then furniture started moving. And now we see shadows." Maurice nodded, scribbling in his notebook. "I believe there's a connection to this house's history. We need to dig deeper." That evening, Maurice gathered the family in the living room. "We're going to try and communicate with the spirit. Sometimes understanding what it wants can help us find a solution," They sat in a circle, the room dimly lit by candles. Maurice held a small recorder and a planchette. We'll use this to ask questions. Stay calm, and no matter what happens, don't break the circle. He placed the planchette on the table. Is there anyone here with us? The planchette moved slowly, spelling out a single word, yes. Peggy gasped, clutching her daughters closer. Maurice remained composed. Why are you here? The planchette moved again, angry. Margaret whispered. Angry about what? Maurice repeated the question. The response came quicker this time. Disturbed. Disturbed by what? Maurice pressed. The planchette didn't move. Instead, a picture frame flew off the wall, shattering against the floor. The family screamed, but Maurice remained steadfast. Show us a sign. What disturbs you suddenly? The room's temperature plummeted, and a gust of icy wind blew out the candles. In the darkness, they heard the same guttural laugh from before. This is getting wild, Maurice muttered under his breath, trying to keep his focus. He lit a candle, the small flame casting flickering shadows. We need to stay calm. Whatever it is, it's trying to scare us. Peggy looked at him, desperation in her eyes. How do we stop it? Maurice sighed. We need more information. I suggest we research the house's history. There might be something in its past that explains all this. The next day, Maurice and the Hodgsons visited the local library. They sifted through old newspapers and records, hoping to uncover the secrets of the house. Look at this, Maurice said, pointing to a headline from decades ago. A family that lived here in the 1920s reported similar disturbances. They said their son, who died tragically, never left. Janet shivered. Do you think it's him? Maurice nodded slowly. It's possible. If his spirit is trapped here, we need to help him find peace. Returning home, Maurice set up a new plan. We'll hold a seance tonight and try to communicate with the spirit again. This time we'll offer to help him move on. As darkness fell, the family gathered once more. Maurice began the seance, his voice steady and calm. Spirit, we know you are here. We know you are angry and disturbed. Tell us what you need so you can find peace. The planchette moved swiftly. Help me. We want to help you, Maurice said gently. Tell us how. There was a long pause, and then the planchette spelled out, free me. Maurice looked at the family. We need to perform a cleansing ritual. It's our best chance to release the spirit. They prepared for the ritual, gathering sage, candles, and holy water. Maurice led the way, chanting softly as he moved through the house, the family following closely behind. As they reached the living room, a powerful wind whipped through the room, extinguishing the candles. The temperature dropped again, and the shadowy figure appeared once more. Maurice stood his ground, raising his voice over the wind. In the name of all that is holy, we cleanse this house. Spirit, find your peace and move on. The figure shrieked, its form dissolving into mist. The wind ceased, and a profound silence filled the room. Did it work? Peggy whispered. Maurice nodded, though his eyes remained wary, for now, but we'll need to stay vigilant. Sometimes, these things can linger. Janet looked up at him, hope in her eyes. Do you think it's over? Maurice smiled gently. It's a step in the right direction. Let's see what tomorrow brings. The following morning, the Hodgson family woke to an unusual stillness. For the first time in weeks, there were no eerie noises or moving furniture. Janet and Margaret tiptoed through the house, their curiosity tinged with caution. Do you think it's really gone? Margaret asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Janet shrugged. Maybe, but we should still be careful. In the kitchen, Peggy brewed a pot of tea, her movements slow and deliberate, as she tried to shake off the lingering unease. Maurice joined her, his face lined with fatigue, but also a hint of optimism. Good morning, Mrs. Hodgson, he greeted her. How did you sleep? Peggy offered a tired smile. Better than I have in weeks. Thank you. Do you think it's really over? Maurice nodded thoughtfully. I believe we've made significant progress. However, spirits can be unpredictable. We'll need to keep monitoring the situation. Later that day, Maurice decided to delve deeper into the house's history. He spent hours poring over records at the local historical society, hoping to uncover more clues. Meanwhile, back at the house, the girls tried to resume a semblance of normalcy. In the evening, Maurice returned with a stack of old documents. "I found some interesting information," he said, spreading the papers across the dining table. "It seems the house was built on land that once belonged to a family named the Becketts. They suffered a terrible tragedy here over a century ago." Janet and Margaret listened intently as Maurice continued. "Their son Thomas died in a fire. The records suggest that his spirit might still be tied to this place, seeking resolution for his untimely death." Peggy looked at Maurice, her eyes wide with concern. "What do we do now?" Maurice sighed. "We need to help Thomas find peace. There's an old ritual mentioned in these documents that might work. It's risky, but it could finally free him." That night, the family gathered in the living room. Once more, the atmosphere thick with anticipation. Maurice lit candles and placed them in a circle, then handed each family member a piece of chalk. "We need to draw a protective circle," he instructed. "It will keep us safe while we perform the ritual." As they completed the circle, Maurice began chanting softly, invoking a sense of calm and focus. "Thomas Beckett, we call upon you. We seek to help you find peace and move on from this place." The air grew colder,
and the candles flickered wildly.
A shadowy figure appeared at the edge of the circle, its presence palpable. "Thomas," Maurice continued, his voice steady, "we know you are here. We understand your pain. It's time to let go and find rest." The figure wavered, then stepped closer, its form becoming more distinct. For the first time, they could see the outline of a young boy, his face marked with sorrow. "Thomas," Janet whispered, her heart aching for the lost spirit. "We want to help you. Please let us help you find peace." The boy's ghostly eyes met hers, and for a moment, the room was silent. Then, with a soft sigh, the figure began to dissolve, the coldness lifting as he faded away. Maurice exhaled deeply, relief washing over him. "I think it worked." Peggy hugged her daughters tightly, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you, Mr. Gross. I don't know how to repay you." Maurice smiled warmly. "No need for thanks. Just knowing your family can live in peace is enough." The next few days passed without incident. The Hodgson family began to reclaim their home, the fear that had gripped them slowly dissipating. Maurice stayed in touch, ensuring they felt supported and safe. One evening, as they sat around the dinner table, Janet looked up at her mother. "Do you think Thomas is happy now?" Peggy nodded, a gentle smile on her lips. "I think so, sweetheart. I think he's finally at peace." Maurice, packing his equipment for the last time, added, "And so are you. It's been a long journey, but you've all shown incredible strength." As Maurice left the house, the sun set over Enfield, casting a warm glow over the neighborhood. The Hodgson family stood together, united and hopeful for the future. Weeks passed, and the Hodgson family slowly adjusted to their newfound sense of normalcy. The haunting had left its mark, but life resumed its ordinary rhythm. Peggy found solace in gardening. Janet and Margaret focused on their schoolwork, and the house, once filled with eerie disturbances, now resonated with laughter and warmth. One evening, Maurice called Peggy. "How are things, Mrs. Hodgson?" Peggy smiled, her voice reflecting her relief. "Much better, Mr. Gross. We've had no disturbances since the ritual." "That's wonderful to hear," Maurice replied. "I've been doing more research, and while I'm confident we've addressed the primary issue, it's always good to stay vigilant." The next day, Janet and Margaret returned from school, their faces glowing with excitement. "Mum, we have a surprise for you," Margaret announced, holding a small potted plant they had grown in their school garden. Peggy's eyes sparkled with pride. "It's beautiful, girls. Let's find a perfect spot for it in the garden." As they planted the new addition, a sense of peace settled over the house. The days grew longer, filled with sunshine and the sounds of children playing outside. One night, as the family gathered for dinner, Janet looked up thoughtfully. "Mum, do you think the house will always be peaceful now?" Peggy considered the question carefully. "I believe so, Janet. We went through something difficult, but we faced it together. That makes us stronger." Maurice continued to check in periodically, his presence a comforting reminder of their shared ordeal. One day he arrived with a surprise. "I brought you something," he said, handing Peggy a small, framed picture of a serene landscape. "It's a symbol of peace and new beginnings." Peggy accepted the gift with gratitude. "Thank you, Maurice. You've been a blessing to us." Maurice smiled. "It's been an honor to help. Remember, if you ever need anything, I'm just a call away." As he left, the family hung the picture in their living room, a reminder of their resilience and the support that had guided them through their darkest days. Time passed and the Hodgson family flourished. Janet and Margaret excelled in school, their confidence restored. Peggy found new hobbies, and the house remained a haven of tranquility. One sunny afternoon, as the family relaxed in the garden, Janet noticed something curious. "Mom, look at the flowers. They're blooming more than ever." Peggy smiled, her heart full. "It's a sign, Janet, a sign that we're finally at peace." That night, as the family sat together under the stars, Margaret asked, "Do you think Thomas found his peace too?" Maurice, who had joined them for a visit, nodded. "I believe he did, Margaret. And in helping him, you found your own peace too." The stars twinkled above, casting a gentle light over the house that had once been a place of fear. Now it was a home filled with love and hope. As the days turned into months, the Hodgson family continued to thrive. The house, once a battleground of supernatural events, was now a sanctuary of joy and comfort. Yet a sense of curiosity lingered in the back of Janet's mind. One evening, while sorting through old family photos, Janet came across a dusty, leather-bound journal tucked away in a drawer. She opened it to find entries dated back to the early 1900s. "Mom, look at this," Janet said, bringing the journal to Peggy. Peggy adjusted her reading glasses and examined the journal. "It looks like it belonged to someone who lived here long ago." Janet's eyes widened as she read aloud. April 3rd, 1921. "The nights grow colder, and the feeling of being watched never leaves. Little Thomas cries for his father every night." Peggy shivered. That must be Thomas's mother. This journal could tell us more about what happened. Janet and Margaret spent the next few days reading through the journal. They learned about the Beckett family's tragic history, the fire that claimed young Thomas's life, and the sorrow that haunted his mother. "Do you think reading this might disturb his spirit again?" Margaret asked, her voice tinged with concern. "I don't think so," Janet replied. "If anything, it might help us understand more and ensure his peace." One stormy night, while the family was gathered around the fireplace, a sudden loud crash echoed from upstairs. They exchanged worried glances, their hearts pounding. "I thought it was over," Peggy whispered, her face pale. Maurice, who was visiting for dinner, stood up. "I'll check it out." Janet and Margaret followed him up the stairs. The noise had come from the attic. Maurice carefully pushed open the attic door, the old hinges creaking in protest. They stepped inside, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. "Look there," Janet pointed to a toppled bookshelf, old books and trinkets scattered across the floor. Maurice picked up a small, ornate box that had fallen. This might be the source of the disturbance. Opening the box, they found an old photograph of Thomas with his parents. Tucked behind the picture was a letter. Maurice read it aloud. "To whoever finds this, please know our Thomas was a sweet boy, taken too soon. His spirit is restless, because he never knew the love of his father, who left before the fire. I pray that one day, someone can bring him peace." Tears welled in Janet's eyes. "We need to do something." Maurice nodded. "We need to perform a final ritual to give Thomas the closure he never had." They gathered in the living room once more, the photograph and letter placed in the center of their protective circle. Maurice led the ritual, his voice strong and steady. "Thomas Beckett, we call upon you. We have found a message from your mother, a plea for your peace. Know that you are loved and remembered." The air grew still, and a soft warm light enveloped the room. The shadowy figure of a young boy appeared, more distinct and serene than ever before. "Thank you," the figure whispered, his voice filled with relief. "I can finally rest." As the light faded, the room felt warmer, filled with a sense of calm and finality. Peggy hugged her daughters, tears of joy streaming down her face. "I think we've truly done it this time," Maurice smiled, a sense of fulfillment washing over him. He's at peace now, and so are you. The Hodgson home became a place of healing and happiness. The family continued to honor Thomas's memory, ensuring his story was never forgotten. One evening, as they sat in the garden, Janet looked up at the sky, now clear and star-filled. "Mom, do you think we did the right thing?" Peggy smiled, her heart full. "Absolutely, Janet. We brought peace to a troubled soul and found our own in the process." Maurice, visiting one last time, looked around the garden, the flowers in full bloom. This house has a new chapter now, one of love and resilience. As the family shared stories and laughter under the stars, they knew that whatever challenges came their way, they could face them together.